Depending on what you're drawing, you're going to want to find your focus point. Sometimes it can be a single point, sometimes it can be multiple, and sometimes it can just be where 2 points come together. And a lot of times it's connected to shapes. If you've studied geometry, you know that triangles are basically the basis for all shapes. It doesn't have to be a triangle as your points, though. Take, for instance, this photograph here. While there are triangles in this photograph, the focus point is the waving line that connects their faces, or that waving line that connects their hands. It's the people in the photograph, and their connection to the people who aren't seen in the photograph. Or this art piece that I had done. The focus point is her face, or rather looking up to her face, from a downward position. And yes, there are shapes in this one as well. As humans, we like shapes and patterns, and as such, it's easiest to find a focal point if there are shapes involved. And the most easiest shape, and the basis for most shapes, and in nature in general, no, I'm not an Illuminati, is a triangle. It's just simple trigonometry and math. But how do you put a triangle in a bust picture, just the face, for those newbie little artists? That's a good question. And the truth is that it's one of the occasions that there isn't just a singular point, but rather a larger point, which is that whole face, even if there are still triangles. Now that I have my sketch, keeping the 2 triangles I had drawn before in mind, I've created that focus point, where the eyes are going to be drawn to in the piece. I'll be honest, I don't always draw triangles or shapes to find my focus point, but if you know where you want your point to go, it's easiest if you rely on the basic shapes of nature to do so. Just like I have done tons of circles representing joints in the girl's body. Composition isn't just where the focus point is, but also where the lines of action are. The lines of action in my drawing are going away from the focus point. In the girl and the cat, they're going in general downwards direction with the curvature at the end. Sometimes the line of action may be straight, and sometimes they might follow those triangular shapes of the picture. Like you might have guessed, the lines of action other than the 2 characters in the piece are going away from the focus point, which expands the view. It's like if you're taking a picture of the sunset. You don't zoom your camera in to see just the sun, but you have it wider so you can see the whole of the sky, which draws your eyes towards where the sun is at, or the horizon line of your photograph. Drawing is the same way. Sometimes you have to expand the view or zoom out to draw attention to what is going on at the focus point. And yet, we still have triangles in this piece that are pointing to and drawing attention towards that focus point, or focal point, as I have it labeled in my sketches. However, like I previously have said, you don't always have to zoom out to expand the view, or to get the best composition for your piece. Sometimes you need to zoom in. It all depends on the feel of the piece. For example, take this photograph. In the photo, it's not zoomed out to see his whole body or the overall pose that he's in. Instead, it's focused just on his face and the upper half. The fact that there is no background other than that solid color also brings attention to his face and the emotion that he's portraying on his features. So, now you may be asking, what if there is a background? Well, to that, I'll use this photograph. Here we have a background and a foreground. The flowers in the foreground make your attention go towards the background, as they are blurred as they get closer to the camera. So what's the focus point here? Well, as you might have guessed, it's his eyes. The focus in this promotional photo for a music video, yes, I'm indicating, is his eyes. Your eyes are immediately drawn to his eyes in this photo. Does this only work for photographs by a photographer? No, in fact, I've drawn a number of pieces myself where the focus point isn't the background or the foreground, it's the eyes of the person, the emotion they are feeling. For example, this piece here. Now, I've drawn pieces before where they really just are someone's eyes. Who hasn't? Especially during math class. I see you and your eye masterpieces on the side of your notes. But for this piece, I wanted the composition to show that he's looking at you. Maybe it's because it's supposed to mock a poster, but your eyes are drawn to meet his eyes before they look at the rest of the piece. It's human nature. Are there shapes in this piece too? Of course! The triangle shape that his arm is making against his face, the crescent shape that his shoulder and his neck are making as he tilts his head. Obviously there's shapes. Now we should probably get back to the drawing, huh? I've now established my base sketch. The next step is to finalize the sketch. For that entire process of finalizing your sketch, you're still going to keep those shapes or focus in mind. Sometimes they can be easy, but if you're making a more complicated art render, it'll be a bit more difficult to obtain. And as the piece zooms out away from the focal point, it's always a good idea to keep dimensions and vanishing points in mind. My art piece has 2 vanishing points. However, it may seem like it only has 1 since each vanishing point is along the 2 visible walls in the bedroom, which intersect each other. Don't rush your sketching process. Always make sure to double check, flip your canvas if you need to. Personally, I should probably flip my canvas more. And erase and sketch more. Your first sketch is rarely ever your final sketch. In fact, a lot of times it isn't. That's okay for it not to be your final version. Art is process, a journey. You're not going to be getting it perfect on your first try. Take your time. Don't rush art. I'm talking to you AIs and AI users and defenders. Sometimes I always try to do is to avoid tangent lines. If you saw my original sketch, there are quite a few lines that were tangents to each other, and honestly, it doesn't look all that pretty. As much as we might like it, and as much as we like shapes, it doesn't bring your piece to life. And how often are you going to take a photo and the lines just perfectly line up with each other? With this in mind, I had adjusted the lines of my piece in my closet in my final sketch so that they weren't tangent to the head of the girl or the nose of the cat or the chair. Now for some little tips as I add line art and flat colors. The composition of the art piece doesn't just end with how you position your characters and objects or cameras on the page. For my line art, I used the mapping brush. I had to adjust a few things from my final sketch, and as you can see, the line art doesn't perfectly cover up my sketching lines. I had some extra details and used the thickness variation, depending on how hard you press down, of the brush to give my lines weight to them. For the most part, the lines that are further away from the light source have thicker lines than the ones that are closer to my light source. But that's for the most part. I am still learning the thickness variations, so if you have some tips for me, I very much appreciate it. When it comes to my background, I added new layers so that it might be easier for me to be able to switch between them as I am doing my coloring. So while it may look like all of the lines are intersecting with each other, they aren't. And as you can see, after using the Paint Bucket tool, selecting the layer above, mind you, to fill in the background and kind of foreground, I don't know. Do you think that does count as being in the foreground? Tip on composition, focus points, and zooming in and out of your piece. After finishing my flat colors and minor details like the wood grain, popcorn ceiling, and the area rug, I went ahead and double-checked that my flat colors aren't taking away from my focus point and that they're still catering towards the overall composition of the piece, the overall feel that I want my piece to evoke. This is why I said composition is important. Composition doesn't just mean how the characters, objects, or camera is on the page, but how the colors coincide with each other, and if they're doing the art piece justice. Just like I like to zoom out of my piece, look at it as an overall whole, and see if it's what I want my composition piece to feel like. It's the feel, the composition overall, the overall structure of your piece is what you want the piece to feel like, what emotions you want someone to see or feel whenever they look at your piece. A few tips as I flat color my characters. As you might have assumed, flat coloring in your characters is so much of a hassle, and as much as I love the Paint Bucket tool, what works best for me is the Magic Selection tool. I select the area outside of my line art and the areas that I don't want to fill, and then inverse it and fill it. Once it's filled, I can then go in with flat colors to the different objects, like in this case, since they are interacting with each other, and flat color in those if they are not the same color as the original. This way, when I go into the color of the individual, instead of having an endless supply of layers, I just use the color selecting magic tool, select brush, and select colors from the first flat color layer, and then on a new layer so I can add in more flat colors, and then just use that same layer with a different base color selected to add more layers to that one. It makes the process of drawing just a tad faster, and in my opinion, just a little shortcut. Until I have my flat colors done in no time, and only a couple of layers too. Instead of different layers for each character or a lot of clipping layers, because for me, the Paint Picker tool hates clipping layers. Is it just me? Do I want to adjust the settings in Visual Clip Studio? Are you listening to this? Can you fix my problem? Back to composition. Now that we've got all of our flat colors in, we can turn back on those notes from before to see if it's still matching the composition that I want for my piece. As you can see in my art, I keep those triangles for the girl and the cat, and you may be wondering if there are other triangles in the piece, and the answer is yes! There's a triangle that's formed between the girl's arm and forearm, the cat's tail and back, and as well as the smaller triangles in the desk and the objects on the desk. There's also a triangle formed against the cat's back and the closet in the background, even if the lines aren't tangent to each other. But can't we just leave the image as flat colors? Well, that's up to you. Honestly, but for me, the answer is no, we can't. And that's why I'm not going to. Remember that focus point? Yeah, that one where the girl's face and the cat's face meet with each other? I like to keep that in mind when I'm adding in the shading. And I'd recommend having it in mind from the very beginning of your piece. Even if you aren't going to shade your piece, it's always wise to have in mind where your light source is coming from and what that does to the overall composition of your piece, and if that changes your focal point. Hence why I mentioned in my line thickness when I was putting in my line art, for the most part. So, where is the light coming from in this piece? Simple. In this one, it's from an off-screen window. That's a window that isn't visible in the image that's producing the light that's shining in and hitting the back of the girl. As a result, there's a bounce light coming off of the wall and the desk and hitting the hind legs and back of the cat, as well as the chair that he's on. Side note, he's a cute little chubby cat, isn't he? The screens on the desk monitor are off, and therefore they aren't shining any light on the back of the cat, or the front of the girl. Because the main light source is coming through the window, that brings the girl's front in mostly shadow and occasional bows light, and a heavy shadow on the ground, but only in front of the girl, and not behind her, because the shadow is also coming from the window, which is the opposite of the desk, and also an underside of the desk where the cables are is not going to be hidden in shadow, since the light is coming in and hitting it. However, notice how I said main light? I wasn't just referring to the other light being the bounce light. Instead, I was referring to the LED lights that are on the ceiling. Call me forgetful, but I had forgotten to add them in when I was coloring my piece, even though I had them in mind and when I was first started sketching the piece. Therefore, they are still a part of the composition, and how their light is going to be affecting it has to be kept in mind as well. If you can read my notes, the LEDs are emitting a red light, and there's a white light coming from the window. White light isn't the light from the sun. Since it's a white light, that means it's going to be more of a cool light source, and not a warm light as if it was from a setting sun. This means that the shadow of the room is going to be of a cool tone, thus a gray-blue. I like to add a new layer and fill the layer with that color before setting it to a multiply and the opacity to 50%. With an airbrush first, I lightly color on the color of the light on a new layer above the multiply layer before going back in with the round brush tool and adding in the small details and the lighter sources onto my renderings. I then put that layer on a glow dodge blending mode. Sometimes when you're putting in your light source, you realize that there are some things that you need to fix, and it's okay to go back and fix those things. Just because you've put in your flat color in does not mean that you can't go back and fix something with your line art. In fact, I end up fixing my line art a lot after I already put in my flat colors. Like I said before, the light from the LEDs is red, and therefore the shadow that's coming from them as a result of that light source is also going to be of a warmer tone, and therefore that's why I chose to use a red-grayish color. Using the round brush tool, my literal favorite friend when it comes to shading and highlights, I went through and kept in mind my LED light source and where it was coming from and added in the new shading. Let's be honest, how often do you only have one light source in your room? Take, for instance, you're sitting on your desk at night with your lamp on, and the moonlight is coming through the window, standing in front of a car with its headlights on, and there's still that light coming from the sun or the moon, depending on the time of the day. Therefore, I always like to add an extra layer of shading and highlight, and setting the shading blending mode to a color burn. So in conclusion, focus point is where the two faces meet each other in this image. The girl and the cat both have their own triangles that meet at that focus point. Their lines of action are also coinciding with that point and giving it more of an emphasis. To draw attention to the focus point in this rendering, the angle expands outward, and so does the depth of angle for the picture, making part of the desk in the foreground and part of it in the background. After all is said and done, and you make sure to sign it, you're left with a cute and innocent looking picture. Remember, the composition of the piece also there is to invoke the feeling and the overall vibe of the art piece. The lighting is supposed to help with that composition of the piece, and therefore is also part of the composition, as well as the colors involved, in both the light source and the flat colors of the art piece. Thank you, and I really hope this helped.